right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. Before I hop into the episode, I just wanted to quickly mention if you have not yet joined our free Sober Curious Facebook group, we have about 1,000 people in there. It's pretty amazing. A lot of great conversations and support going on. So I will pop the link in the episode description. And without further waiting, I'm going to get into today's episode. So I'm very excited to have Peggy Cooney here with me today. And Peggy and I have quite a few mutual friends, actually, as the way that like the sober world always works. We all know each other. But Peggy is a good friend of Kathy's and Jeff G, who are both really involved in the mindful life practice. And I've heard so much about her and the work she does and the book she wrote and her Facebook group with the sober world. So I'm just super excited to actually meet her today and hear a lot about her story and her journey. So welcome, Peggy. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you here. And I was wondering if we could start and you could tell me a little bit about sort of you and where you are in the world and a little bit of your story.
Sure. I currently live in Northern California, so right outside the capital city of we live in West Sacramento, and also live up in the mountains about 3 hours away. We're retired, which is a joke because I retired for 14 days, but we have two places we live. So, so I live in Northern California. I am married to Paul for 35 years, and we have 5 kids together and 12 grandkids. So, social work instructor for UC Davis. That's my after retirement job. So I've been teaching social work and coaching for about 8 years.
Amazing. Are you coaching? Are you sober coaching?
No, I'm coaching social workers. So one of the biggest, as Maya Angelou says, we do something until we learn better and then we do better.
Yeah.
The social work field's very young, so it's really exciting to be, especially around child welfare and adult protective services. So we're always learning new things that work better. And one of the central things that we do currently is coaching. We teach safety organized practice, which is strength-based, trauma-focused, really trying to get families back together if they have to be separated absolutely as soon as possible with the least amount of trauma, which is impossible. I coach people on how to do family facilitation, family meeting facilitation, and also individual coaching as social workers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a dream job for sure.
And you have a huge family, 5 kids, 12 grandkids.
My daughter has 2 sets of twins, so she made up for a third of the population. She's very.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Amazing. And have you always been in California?
Yes. I was born and raised near San Francisco. So, and my boys still live. I have 2 adult boys. They live down there. And my daughter lives really nearby in Sacramento. So.
Oh, beautiful. I've actually never been to California. But I can imagine it. I imagine it's like really sunny and warm and palm trees and beachy. It's my imagination.
It's everything. Actually. So we still have about 4 feet of snow up at our cabin right now. So, and it's
really,
it's only 3 hours away. Yeah.
I would have never guessed that. I guess Tahoe's in California, right? I knew that because a long time back, I was looking at a yoga teacher training there, like in 2013. And I remember Tahoe was like a ski hill. So I guess I knew that there was California, but or not California, there was snow in California, but it wasn't the image that exactly comes to mind. But there you go.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of context into your story with alcohol and your sober journey. Like, where did your drinking begin?
I probably always drank. I didn't drink until I was 21. My parents drank, so I was not really into drinking and really promised myself that I would never really be into drinking. And, I did the normal 21, 20s drinking, but it was always pretty bingey. But as I got married and was raising my kids, I drank socially. And we justify everything that we do, but I really did drink socially. In fact, I had a lot of fancy bottles of alcohol on my brand new hutch that we bought. And I just bought the bottles because they were pretty, right? And about 2 years after we had that, I finally was gonna break out one of that really fancy bottles of vodka. And my kids are all older than you, and said, "Mom, don't drink it. It's just water." So they had managed to drink all the alcohol out of the bottles and make it look like nothing ever happened. So at that point, in my 30s and 40s, I just drank socially. That was about it. But when I did drink, looking back on it, was never one. It was always kind of a bingey style of drinking. But we didn't keep alcohol really well, other than those bottles my kids drank. We didn't really keep alcohol in the house. And I really didn't start drinking until I was in my 50s, where it started to become a little bit of a problem. And really that came out of working in child welfare.
Yeah.
I'm a social worker and was doing direct practice. And after a while, nobody becomes a social worker and thinks, "Oh my gosh, I'm never going to see child abuse or I'm never going to see elder abuse." It doesn't happen. You're going in there and you're going to see that. But what really starts to hurt your soul is the fact that when a child discloses they've been abused, they're the ones that have to be taken out of the home and put with strangers. And after years of that, it breaks your heart. And that's kind of when I started drinking. Also, I think one of the other factors really had to do with being a blended family. I brought 3 kids into the marriage. He brought 2. We've been married for about 35 years. And that was a lot of stress. I really tried to be like the best stepmom on the planet, and there's no such thing. So that was kind of stressy too. But the system really started, I found myself, working, and then I have a very black and white husband. He's a financial analyst, so he really does see things in data and black and white. And when you're a social worker, you just can't come home and really talk about the stuff that you're experiencing. And you almost get to a point where the abuse doesn't affect you anymore. Mm-hmm. Not the way it should affect you, because you see it all the time, and it starts to eat out your soul from the inside out. The final nail, I guess, would be that there was a huge sexual harassment case where my manager sexually harassed a male coworker. And I don't want to get into detail more than that, but a female and a male, it was one of the big 5, right? Because it was a manager on a subordinate. Mm-hmm. And I had to be the whistleblower. I wouldn't have done it any other way, but it did make my life absolute hell for 2 years. I had 2 years to retire. He left because he was so humiliated. We made the headlines of the local news station. I had families saying, "Why should we trust you? Look what you did. Why should we trust you with our children? Look what you did at work." So really, I ended up having her job, his job, and my job. And my daughter was getting married that year. So that's really when it really escalated, is just to get through those 2 years. I was stubborn. I could have retired, and I had 2 years to get my full retirement. And I had this really annoying stubbornness that I wasn't going to let them win. And so I put an app on my phone and did a countdown, and I retired, the day I turned 62.
Wow.
I was retired for 14 days. And then UC Davis called me up and asked me to teach for them. And it is an absolute dream job. It's all the wonder without the direct practice, the secondary trauma. I get to teach new social workers. I get to teach them, and with the latest information that we have. So I've been doing that for about 8 years. But what I realized 2 years after I started teaching, I was selected out of 1,750 instructors. I got Instructor of the Year. And I found myself going home that night. And of course, there was wine at that ceremony too, right? And I realized that I really couldn't stop drinking. Like by that time, I was really addicted to an addictive substance. I wasn't really willing to admit it very much at that time, but I knew in my heart that I was in trouble. One of those high functioning, and I hate that word because it's kind of meaningless, but I managed to work. Mm-hmm. I planned everything around working. I would teach, and then I would come home and study for the next day, and then I would drink. But the people that suffered in my life were my family. Yeah. I was teaching by day and breaking my family's heart at night.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's so much in that story. Like what struck me first is sharing the point where you weren't drinking much throughout your adulthood, and then it really hit at a much later age than the majority of people I speak to. Like most people I speak to, it would be at a younger age where alcohol became a problem and then was just a problem for a long time. And I think your story is a perfect example of how our external world and all the things happening, all the stresses we have going on can like create this storm for us, like at any point in our lives where we're just like, how do I cope with this? And then the drinking begins. And so I think that's a really interesting example of how it's not always such a cookie cutter experience for everyone. Like for everyone, it's different.
Yeah. About 3 years ago, my director put out a survey. So that was 3 years ago. So that was pre-COVID, right? And the survey talked about using any kind of addiction or overuse of anything. And there's a high obesity rate among social workers too. So food, alcohol, shopping, relationship problems. And so 60% of the respondents, which we know it's way more now with COVID, reported that they had an issue around one of those four things.
Yeah. My sister's a social worker. As we have this conversation, I'm like, I should give her a call.
Where?
She's in where we grew up in Toronto. Yeah. Okay. I always think it's interesting that my sister and I both became healers, but just with like very different modalities. I think it's interesting that we both have that in common.
Very much. Yeah.
So tell me about what was the moment for you that led you to quit drinking?
Again, it was my early 50s when I stopped, when I realized I had a problem. But there had been like maybe 4 incidents that were major where, I passed out at my daughter's mother-in-law's Mother's Day barbecue. I just passed out, had blacked out. I had another couple weddings that I went to that I embarrassed my daughter around, just drinking too much and not being one of those blatant crazy people. And nobody's crazy; they're just sick. Is Paul and I would get into a fight, and then the family would get involved. That's always been the sort of MO, right? He would get upset about my drinking and then pull the family into the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The last incident, we were up at Lake Tahoe. Paul has his family has an annual family picnic there. And we rented this beautiful house in Tahoe, and Lindsay, my daughter, with the 2 sets of twins and her husband, Jason, and then my son, Brett, we all stayed in the same place. And I didn't drink during the day at the beach. By that time, I was pretty able to keep it together during the day so that I wouldn't embarrass anyone or myself. I was pretty aware of it. But when after 8 hours in the sun, the hot sun, and then I came home and I had 2 shots of whiskey, and I don't even drink whiskey. I don't even drink it. It's never been alcohol of my choice. It hit me like a brick. And Paul got really upset. When Lindsay came home with the kids and Brett came home, they came home from the picnic later than we did. Paul was screaming at me. So Brett went after my husband almost decked him. And then my son-in-law, Jason, had to pull Brett off my husband in front of my 4 grandkids that were 3 and 7. And I don't think I could have hated myself anymore that night. I don't think Paul left. He left with no intention of returning to the marriage. And, Brett's the caretaker, and he wanted to make sure that I was okay. But the next morning, Lindsay said to me, and she really did save my life. She said, "Mom, if you want the kind of relationship you want to have with me, Jason, and the kids, you have to do something about your drinking." And I already knew before I came out and she said that, I knew that I was done. It's really crazy, but I really understood what she was saying. Of course, I had self-loathing up, just complete self-loathing. But I went into the bedroom and I was just so crushed and so shameful that I just got down on my knees and I heard this voice, and I'm not a woo-woo person at all, not at all. And I heard this voice that said, "You're done and you're going to be okay."
Wow.
And I flipped on my Facebook page and this advertisement for Sober Sis. Her name is Jen Couch and she's out of Texas, had a 21-day reset program. And I signed up for it. Wow. And she has a Marco Polo component to it where, a video walkie-talkie. And I made my first video that morning. And wow. That's how it happened. But I knew at that point that it was almost a relief when Lindsay called me on it. Because before that, my kids really made a lot of excuses for me. "Mom, you need to eat when you drink. You're just tired." So really, Lindsay had finally had it. And it wasn't all the time. It wasn't like I was, and again, it doesn't matter. You start going into that part of your brain going, "Well, it wasn't as bad as that person." But I was, I was, much further than that. Who knows what would have happened if she hadn't stepped in.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I love that part of your story about going on Facebook and seeing a Facebook ad, because that's what happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard this part of my story on episodes or anything, but I was seeing targeted ads for 1 year, no beer. And that was keep saying, we think that we're like, oh, social media has so many, negative things, blah, blah, blah. But for me, I do think it's the reason that I quit drinking, because I don't think I had ever seen sobriety positioned in such a cool way, such a different way. And for me, I thought AA was the only way, and that did not pull me in. And this whole thing of like sobriety being cool and like, 1 year, no beer, like hip, like this pulled me in. And so I just think it's amazing how the universe is sending us messages through like the social media algorithms. And like, I love that for you, it's completely different. I've never even heard of Sober Sis, but I love that it's a totally different program, but it's like the universe was like sending it to you,
Yeah. That was again, another huge lesson for me, that if I would just be open. And ever since then, things have happened for me because I'm present and I'm willing to hear that. I'm really, it was very clear for me that I was done, and that it was no accident that, Jen and her Labradoodle showed up on my Facebook page that morning. Really the rest is history with her. I'm still really involved with Sober Sis and a lot of other programs because I'm crazy that way.
So tell me about, so you said you're still involved with Sober Sis, lots of other programs. Tell me about what those initial sobriety days were like. Like, what kind of support did you use? What were your strategies? How did you get through it?
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I never journaled before. I journaled that day, and I've journaled every day. So I'm at 32 months, I think. I've journaled every day. There hasn't been a day that I haven't journaled. And again, I don't know why I started journaling. I just started journaling. But and one of the caveats I made is that Sober Sis was going to have a retreat in Fort Worth in October. I quit on July 12, 2019. So I bought a ticket. I bought the airfare. And so that was kind of my carrot, for staying sober those first 100 days. And at the retreat, I just started posting my journal entries. she had a big Facebook program. Now she has Mighty Networks instead. She doesn't use Facebook anymore. But so I started posting every day of just how I was feeling, right? What was going on that day for me. So what am I? Day 979 or something right now. And I posted every day on her site for a year. And people said, oh my gosh, I love your poster. Like, that's me too. That's exactly how I felt. And that kind of was the basis for the book that I ended up writing. But let's see I did Annie Grace's 100 Days. Another person that's not necessarily alcohol is Stacy. Can't remember her last name, but she does around brain chemicals and brain boosting. So that was really fun to take her class. And Stacy Danford is her name, and she's a friend of Jen from Sober Sis. So, I read every Quit Lit book on the planet. I really do, like so many other people, need a support group for the books that I have laying everywhere. I'm an avid reader, and that's one thing my mom did with me. So, and that, it's just, I took Laura McCowan's We're the Luckiest and Living Color. Yeah, I just really and I think one of the things that I can't say enough, and people don't get to do this like I do, is that at university, at 1 year, I told my director what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they have been the most supportive people on the planet. Yeah. I'm actually doing presenting my book at the Wellness Conference in Anaheim this year. Wow. And there's so many people in the world, especially in the medical field, that aren't able to come out like I did.
It's so true.
I just feel like it definitely is my passion. Now. Yeah.
I loved hearing your story because I just feel like I'm resonating so much with it. Like, so many similarities, just in the sense, like, I got writing in the private Facebook group of 1 Year No Beer. And then I ended up writing a book as well. That's still, no movement has been done with it. So kudos to you for getting yours published and everything. That's amazing. And then, coming out and speaking to your employers. And I got really lucky too, in that I actually told my employers when I was 7 days sober, and I actually was having a breakdown at work, and they just fully supported me, and they knew in the 90 days and supported me. And it was amazing, considering I was a teacher, and teacher in the Middle East, where alcohol is so taboo in the first place. So wow, there's just so much that resonated there. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
I love what you're saying, Alex, too. And I have a person that does all my social media because I'm old and I don't know how to do any of it. And she's wonderful. So I just write, and she makes that look nice. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of bashing myself this morning about being older. Like, maybe I'm not as relevant, but this connection we feel. You're in your 20s. I'm going to be 70 this year. Yeah. The connection among people is almost like sometimes it's overwhelming. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And you know what I feel, that within every different person, I had a guest on my show who was a parent of young-ish children and worked in whatever her job was. I think she worked in media or something. But anyway, one of my yoga members listened to that episode and messaged me and said, this isn't anything against you, but I just really, really resonated with her a bit more than you, because she is a mom and whatever. And so when you say maybe I'm not as relevant, it's different parts of us are going to resonate with different people for different reasons. And it doesn't mean that I was not the right person for that listener, but just they found something in this person that was that resonates. That's me. And so I don't think it matters what age anyone is or what their story is, because it's going to resonate with different people all over the world. And as long as we all have the same goal, which is helping people get sober. Right. So I think it's beautiful.
Well, it was so funny because one of my first, maybe I was 4 years in with my teaching, and I was teaching up in Humboldt County, which is just such a beautiful part of Northern California. And right on the water, seals, right on the ocean. And this one young guy got up and it was about fairness and equity, that I was teaching fairness and equity. And he got up and he said, when I saw you and stand up in front of my class, he was a young Hmong boy man. And he said, when I saw you, I'm like, oh God, like she's going to be boring. And he said, you end up being one of the best teachers I ever had. You're funny, you're relevant. Wow. And I thought, and, I've always shared that, he wrote it almost like in a poem form when he did it, but I love the connection. I absolutely, I think that connection's probably my middle name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Beautiful. So you mentioned your book. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. So your book is based off of the posts that you did journaling about your sober days. Tell me more.
Yeah, it's kind of in different parts, like it's called This Side of Alcohol. And so the first chapter is the first 90 days. So the first 90 days, just every, really my raw post that I had when I was going through it. And so it really shows that up and down, like, I know I'm never going to drink again. I fucking hate everybody. Just that up and down that happens. And then also, it's really weaved. It's kind of like a Claire Pooley with Sober Diaries, because it has my journal entries, but it's also weaved in, that's probably not even a word, with stories about me growing up. And, I grew up in a very alcoholic family, but I didn't really understand that it was alcoholic. A really intimate partner violent situation with my parents. And so just some really funny stories as well. My dad, I have 3 brothers. One is 10 years younger than I am. And then my older brothers are 8 and 10 years older, and they have a different father. Their father passed away. So we were driving with my dad one time, and my little brother, I was 16, so it was right before my parents got divorced. And my little brother was 6. And my dad was the coolest guy ever. My dad was a cool guy. Like he could start water skiing on the beach, a beach start, go all the way around the lake with his Panama hat on, with his cigarette. And then, he'd get dropped off at the beach, kick off his skis, walk off and, stamp his cigarette out, all very environmentally unfriendly, but that was a long time ago. He was just a cool guy. People really liked him. But my dad was driving, and we had this big old monster Oldsmobile 88. It's like a boat. I ended up with it in high school as a bride present when my parents got divorced. My dad was smoking a cigarette, and he flung the cigarette out the window, and it went around and it got on my brother's crotch. And it was smoking. So I'm screaming in the back of the car going, Dad, stop the car. My brother's on fire. And my dad just picked up his beer, like pulled over.
Oh my God.
Walked around with his beer. This is just how people lived when I was younger. It was like normal, right?
Yeah.
So he opened up my brother's car door, poured some beer on my brother's couch.
Oh my goodness.
Drove on. It was a crazy life.
Wow.
I don't even know why I brought that up. You're just easy to talk to.
I love this example that you give, because I was actually just thinking the other day, this is a little bit off topic, but I was a grade 1 teacher. And so I step into that personality sometimes. And I was riding my motorbike, and I pulled up to the intersection. There were 2 really young kids, 2 Indonesian kids on a motorbike together. One of them was driving it, I think they might have been like 10. One with no helmet. They both had no helmet. And I don't think they could really understand me, but I stopped. And I go, where's your helmet? And they're like, no. And I'm like, you need a helmet. Your brain's important. And as I drove off, I was thinking about a similar incident that happened when I was in Kuwait, which was like children driving a car, which I kind of freaked out and was like, this isn't safe. Anyway, but I love that you bring that up, because I was then thinking about how, as I drove off, how every culture is so different, and what's normal in ours is not in theirs. And so for me to see children without helmets, I'm like, that's so unsafe. But for their culture, that's not maybe something that they have really known about. And then I love the example you give, because that's not so long ago, right? That would have been like 60 years ago. And that was normal in American and Canadian culture. Yeah, to drink beer and have your cigarette while you're driving in the car. And I just love that example because I think sometimes we think when we see these things and we come from our Western perspective, we think that we maybe like know better or something. But, 50 years ago, we were still doing stuff like that too. So
even my kids didn't have seatbelts.
Wow.
So our kids did not, when they were babies, weren't in seatbelts or car seats. There was no car seat.
Yeah. Wow.
We used to stand Matt up in the back of a van, and one time we turned around and he was asleep and he was standing up.
Wow.
We just didn't, things are different.
Yeah.
I was just actually laughing with one of the gifts that happened out of getting sober is my best friend. She's the best friend in my wedding. Her name's Gretchen. And we roomed together. We drank a lot together. But we were best friends, and you know how you get married and people drift apart. And last year, maybe the year before, it doesn't really matter. I wonder where Gretchen is. So I reached out to her. She's only an hour away from me. So we see each other all the time now. But we were just laughing this morning when we were talking on the phone. We got so drunk one night and we were driving separate cars. And when the policeman pulled us over, we both pulled over. Both of us pulled over.
Wow.
Like he turned his light on and we both pulled over. But what we were talking about is how different, you're talking about culture.
Yeah.
How different that culture was, because he pulled us over, he drove us home, and he asked her out. And now everybody, and just for the right reasons too, you're going to get a DUI, but it was so different then. I mean, it wasn't the same as it is now.
It is now. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So interesting. All right. We digress. Where were we? I was asking about your book.
I'm really good at it.
I am too. And that's what I love about these conversations. I love getting on calls with people and like hearing their stories and their journeys. And there's so much more to a person than just their sobriety, So what have been, I guess, some of the best and most challenging parts of sobriety you've already shared, but like what have been the best parts of being alcohol free?
I would say, I think the absolute biggest thing is that I have a huge integrity core value, and now I'm just in alignment. Like who I am on the outside. I know we hear it all the time, but truly who I am on the outside is who I am on the inside. I'm predictable. I have a nice, simple life. I feel like I wrote in my journal this morning, I've always been afraid to die, like terrified of dying. And I think part of that is, my mom died. I lost my parents, both of them, when I was 19. Lots of childhood trauma, but my mom drank, right? And what you made me think about was that for my mom, even though I really didn't realize that alcohol was the major problem, because my older brothers kind of made sure that we didn't know, which kind of made it worse, right? Because we didn't know what kind of, like when we walked in the door, we didn't know what kind of mom we were going to get. And I think I would have been more okay with it if I would have known that alcohol caused it, if that makes sense. But like my mom never got to make living amends, right? And I think one of the most beautiful things about being sober is that my kids can really say, my mom overcame the one thing that was holding her back from being her true self. And so I don't want to leave. I have lots of things to do. But I know now I'm not afraid of it, because I know that I can leave this world with my integrity intact. Not wishing I would have done something, but I'm doing it.
So beautiful. Oh, I just got shivers. So beautiful.
Oh, thanks, Alex. And I think, I'm sure you feel this way too. Sometimes I feel bad for people that haven't had an alcohol problem, because I've grown so much and learned so much. And now I've forgiven my mom after 50 years, right? Really feeling like I've changed the trajectory of my family's life, right? And my grandkids are funny. Like, Grandma, you bringing the AF drinks? Where are the AF drinks? So, my kids drink. Most of the time they're pretty responsible about it, but I'm also showing the grandkids that there's a different way. Mm-hmm. And I really like that.
Yeah. And so beautiful. And it's not even, I think, what you say to them, but it's just what you show them and what they see in you. And so I think that's an amazing thing to role model for them.
I'm safe for them. I know as a social worker too, I know just scientifically kids don't feel safe when their parents are altered.
Wow.
It bothers them. They just don't feel safe. And so I'm usually the one they kind of seek out now.
That's so interesting. Gives me something to think about. All right. I have one last question for you, Peggy. If you had any wisdom for someone who was curious about starting a sober journey, what would that advice be?
I wrote a couple things down. You can't do it alone. You can't do this without community. You can't do it. And you need to tell at least one person everything. You don't have to tell everybody everything, but I think you need to tell one person everything. You're all about your alcohol problem, because if you don't, you're always leaving that door open that says maybe I can drink normally. Reframing, especially for people your age, to say that you can't drink in your 20s is very daunting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to say I get to be sober is a different way to look at it. And, that really comes out of my social work. Journaling, I surrender every morning. I just kind of breathe. I've never been into meditation before. This is the first time ever. And I can actually feel my body go from being in my amygdala after pausing and going up into my prefrontal cortex and be able to actually think. It's that, taking that pause and to really have an SOS plan. If you plan on going out, especially in the early days, I just didn't go anywhere. But that was very easy for me with COVID. COVID happened about 6 months in for me, but just to have a plan, to have a plan and don't go anywhere where alcohol is the main attraction. You can go where there's alcohol, but if it's the main attraction, you need to stay away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. All really, really good suggestions. Great wisdom. Thank you so much, Peggy.
Oh, yeah. Alex, thank you for having me. It really means the world.
It was really nice to meet you. I just feel like we have so many connections, and I've heard so much about you from the amazing Kathy and Jeff. And then to finally, I knew we were saying just before we came on the call of we feel like we've already met because we've just seen each other so much. And then to finally actually meet you and hear your story, it's just been amazing. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. And I definitely have to get your book after this and start reading it because I'm very interested. So
just email me. I'll send it to you.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. Get me your address and I'll get you one.
Amazing. So for anyone that's listening to this episode, I'm going to pop Peggy's links and information in the show notes so anyone can connect with her and her amazing Facebook group. And that's it for now. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, Alex.
Bye.